Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel, The Brain Workout. My name is Nthabiseng Mofokeng. In the previous video, we have reviewed Winnie Mandela A Life, written by Anna-Marie Dupré. As we continue to celebrate the Women's Month in South Africa, remembering the 9th of August 1956, where the women had participated in the anti-pass demonstration. Today we'll be looking at one of the most influential women who played part in fighting for struggle. And just to share a bit background about the details of that day, like who was leading it and why was it only the women who were protesting and what was the demonstration all about. The demonstration was led by 4 women, Lillian Ngoyi, Rahima Moza, Sophie Williams, and Helen Joseph. Before 1958, the racial segregation was still in place. The pass law was still in place, but only applicable to black men. And in 1958, the Nationalist Party came into power, and they came with a bunch of ridiculous acts. These acts included the Prohibition of Mixed Marriage Act, the Group Areas Act, the Native Labor and the Reservation of Separate Amenities Act. After the announcement of the Nationalist Party, the women said, enough is enough. We have witnessed the raids, the arrests, the loss of pays, the long hours at the pass office, the weeks in the cells awaiting for trial, and the forced farm labors. And this is what the pass laws have brought to African men, not for a crime, but for the lack of pass. The pass laws have brought punishment and misery to our men, and not only is the pass laws being extended to us as women, but to our kids as well. And they said, no. So they protested against the whole spectrum of unjust laws and ridiculous acts. They protested against the ghetto housing, the forced removals of black people from certain areas, against the passes, the banned education, the black poverty. In fact, they protested against everything that have made up the horror of racial segregation in the country. And they shared one of the heartwarming messages during the protest. We speak from our hearts as mothers, as women. Life cannot be stopped. We must love and marry and find home. We must bear children in hope and in pain. We must love them as part of ourselves. We must help them to grow. And we must endure all the longings and sufferings of motherhood. Because of this, we are made strong to come here to speak for our children, to strive for their future. We, the voters and the voteless, we call upon you, the minister who is responsible for this act, and upon the government and the electorate of South Africa to hear us. So today's book is Side by Side by Autobiography of Helen Joseph. Winnie Mandela refers to Helen Joseph as a white mother. And that's how Helen Joseph has influenced most of the black women during the apartheid. Side by Side explores Helen Joseph's personal and political life. As black townships continue to confront the South African police and armed force, this book is a contribution for their courageous history by a woman who was herself part of that history. And what I find it interesting is that just like most of the freedom fighters, political activists who fought against the struggle of apartheid and for freedom, they were never given enough credit, and she too was largely ignored since her death in 1992. Helen Joseph was a prominent anti-apartheid activist in South Africa from the 1950s to her death in 1992. She was a tremendous organizer who played a key role in organizing for the democratic protest of South African women against all apartheid acts. She was the only white woman who was among the final group of 30 to be tried in the treason trial from 1958 to 1961. And she was also the first person to be placed under the house arrest in October 1962 under the Sabotage Act. But she re-emerged in the 1970s as a public figure. Nelson Mandela included her in the same category of great veteran leaders of the liberation struggle as Albert Luthuli, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, and Moses Kotane. She was born in England in 1905 in a middle-class family, and if seen it all was a person, that would be Helen Joseph. She was there in the First World War, in the Second World War, in the apartheid, in the end of apartheid, and she has seen all the pandemics that came forth. So she has seen it all. She left England at the age of 22, going abroad to India to teach English, and she came to South Africa in the 1930s and got married to Billy Joseph. And their marriage was complicated. Billy Joseph was gay, and at that time, the homosexual marriage was still illegal. She became increasingly involved in politics in her 40s and influenced by her work and her colleagues, most importantly, Solly Zakes, who was the General Secretary of the Garment Workers Union and fighting for justice. In fact, she says her eyes were opened to the reality of the world around her. She became aware and she became ashamed of her position as a white person in the country. She realized that black children struggled for education and opportunity compared to whites, and only whites had a parliamentary vote and not blacks. And the national income was distributed uneven based on racial groups, and only 13% of the land was made available to black people, in which they formed 85% of the population. She became a member of the South African Federation of Women and served as a secretary, and she was selected as honorary national vice president of the South African Congress of the Democrats. Ever since then, she was the lead organizer in arranging for leaders to go overseas and for protests. Particularly the well-known one is the anti-pass demonstration, where 20,000 women marched to the union buildings in Pretoria against the extension of the pass law to black women and kids. After the Bantu education was introduced, the Bantu education was part of those acts that were introduced in 1958, which meant that there was no room for a Bantu in a European community above the level of certain forms of labor, which means that a black child cannot do certain subjects. They have to do all those subjects that will make them of service to a white person as a labor. So the ANC called for total rejection, and they arranged for a conference of 700 delegates from organizations opposed to the Bantu education. It was from this conference that the African Education Movement and Informal Educational Council was formed, centered in Johannesburg, and because this was illegal, so they formed informal clubs for the boycotting children. The clubs were dedicated to teach a black child all those subjects that they were not allowed to learn: maths, geography, and history. And Helen Joseph, together with other helpers, they were training specialists in this club. From then, the Congress Alliance called for the adoption of the People's Freedom Charter, which became the reason for the Treason trial. The Freedom Charter, as you read it, says, the people shall govern. All national groups shall have equal rights. The people shall share in the country's wealth. The land shall be shared amongst those who work it. So as you read the Freedom Charter, you realize that South Africa is not going anywhere. It's not moving forward. It's not moving backward. Yes, the apartheid was ended, but the very same things that the people have fought against in the apartheid, it's the very same issues that we're still facing. The black poverty was there in the apartheid. The black poverty is still here post-apartheid. The wealth was supposed to be distributed amongst those who are living in the country. But the wealth, 70% of the economy, it's still owned by white people. They fought against the security. They wanted housing. They wanted comfort, which is still things that are still lacking in today. But moving on, it's a topic for another day. In 1955, the Minister of Justice announced that he intended to arrest close to 200 people on charge of high treason. The Congress of the People had been raided to investigate treason. Soon after that, 156 alleged traitors were arrested, and Helen was one of them. Because there was no large court that could accommodate that number of people, they were divided into groups of 30. She was fortunate to be part of the group of the ANC leaders, which included Nelson, Walter Sisulu, Robert and Lillian and Stanley. The treason trial ended after 4 years in which all the accused were not found guilty, but some of them were later convicted at the Rivonia trial. After the trial and expiry of her banned orders, she wrote letters, articles to the press, invited to talk in student meetings, visiting and finding the banished Africans, attending the Federation's meeting, and it was at this point where she became very close to Winnie Mandela. She was also amongst the 2,000 people who were arrested under the state of emergency in 1960 for 5 months. Even in jail, the racial treatment was still in place. Helen describes that Black people had only mats to sleep on and no other furniture, whereas for white people, they had beds, they had couples of chairs, they had cupboards, and they were allowed to take a walk and exercise. From then, Helen was banned repeatedly and became the very first person to be placed under house arrest under the Sabotage Act. The house arrest meant doing a daily reporting to the police station. Failure to do so could result in 12-month jail sentence. It meant you were forbidden to communicate with other people, including same family members. You were forbidden to be a member of any legal organization, from publishing any statements, and you had a curfew. You were expected to be in your house 12 hours a day if you are lucky, and for some, it was the whole 24 hours in your house. Much has been written over the years about this attack on humanity, which continues to this day in South Africa. The Nationalist Party justifies its defense against encroaching communism. What white South Africans see is that if anything can convince people about the advantages of communism, it is poverty and exploitation that is firmly rooted in the apartheid system, supported and protected by police state. As a white in South Africa, she belonged to an unjust society, protected, corseted by the color of her skin, born with privilege, power, and resources. She hated the security, apartheid laws, and their practices in South Africa against Black people, and made a decision to remain in the country despite the constant persecution, when she could have easily returned to England. Much has been written over the years about this attack on humanity, which continues to this day in South Africa. The nationalist government justifies it as a defense against encroaching communism. What white South Africans cannot see is that if anything can convince people of the advantages of communism, it is poverty and exploitation that is firmly rooted in the apartheid system, supported and protected by its police state. As a white woman in South Africa, she belonged to an unjust society, protected, corseted by the color of her skin, born with privilege, power, and resources. Yet she hated the security, apartheid laws, and their practices in South Africa against Black people. She made a decision to remain in the country despite the constant persecution, when she could have easily returned to England. She didn't run away when it was easy to do so, or stand on the sidelines. Yet she stood firm in her beliefs of equality, justice, and humanity. Her determination, resilience, and bravery as a woman is what makes Helen Joseph outstanding. These freedoms will fight side by side throughout our lives until we have won our liberty. The liberty was won, apartheid was ended, and she passed away in 1992. That is Side by Side, autobiography of Helen Joseph. The book is available only online under the South African History Books. Enjoy the book widely. Thanks for watching.